We must now go back a bit and explain what the whole scene had looked like from Uncle Andrew's point of view. Please be seated. So begins a terribly sad episode in the book The Magician's Nephew, the sixth book in the series The Chronicles of Narnia. Maybe you're familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis, Oxford professor and late-in-life convert to Christianity and to the Anglican Church. Even if you haven't read all the books, you probably know at least a little bit about the very first book in the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The series takes place in Narnia, a world that exists side by side with ours, and the books tell stories of people from our world, usually children, who stumble into Narnia and discover a world ruled by the great lion Aslan. Each book reveals some new aspect of Narnia, and in the sixth book, The Magician's Nephew, we learn how Narnia itself was created. Two children, Polly and Diggory, are the stars of the book, and Diggory is the nephew of the old man Andrew, who is a magician of sorts and who has discovered a way to send other people to other dimensions. And so Andrew sends Diggory and Polly on a journey that takes them from world to world until the two children, along with Andrew, arrive in another place, a place that seems to be completely empty. And it turns out that they've traveled back in time and arrived in Narnia's dimension at the very moment of Narnia's creation. They're in an utterly dark void, and soon they hear music, which seems to bring light with it. Land forms underneath them, and as the music continues, trees and plants sprout up and grass covers the ground. The music changes and animals begin to appear. And then they see that it's Aslan himself who's singing. It's the music of the lion that's giving birth to this new world. Aslan is the source of new life. And once the land is filled with animals, Aslan makes his way around, picking two animals from each kind and giving them the gift of speech. Narnia, awake! Aslan calls out, offering a thunderous climax to his act of creation. At least that's what the children see. They're mesmerized, taking everything in with wonder and delight. When they first see the imposing lion, rather than being afraid, they're in awe. They're drawn to his majesty and his beauty. They recognize him as good and powerful and the source of all that's around them. Uncle Andrew, however, sees everything a little bit differently. What you see and hear depends a good deal on where you're standing, we're told, and it also depends on what sort of a person you are. Uncle Andrew's heart, you see, isn't as pure as the hearts of the children. He's selfish and a bit of a coward. And when he first sees animals come into being, he's suspicious of them, and he keeps waiting for them to attack. When he sees Aslan, he's terrified. Aslan is a lion, of course, and lions can't talk. So when Aslan speaks, Uncle Andrew convinces himself that what he hears is a lion's roar. The children are amazed and delighted, but Uncle Andrew sees with different eyes, and he hears with different ears, so there's no room in his heart for amazement and delight. He's filled instead with terror and dread. I ache for Uncle Andrew whenever I hear this story. He's witness to something good and beautiful, but because of the filters and blinders that he carries with him, he's unable to recognize and enjoy it. All of us carry filters and blinders with us as we move through our days. Some we've inherited from our parents, some we've learned along the way, some we've worked hard to acquire and hold on to. Now, sometimes blinders can be good. They can keep us focused on tasks at hand, but other blinders and filters keep us from recognizing the good around us, the beautiful and the true. I remember a hike in the desert many years ago with a group of classmates. We had driven for hours deep into the desert, and as we hiked, we marveled at the barren desolation. Nothing but rocks and sand all around. But our guide found an outcropping of rock, and as he poked at a loose spot with his staff, we were amazed as a tiny trickle of water emerged. None of us had expected that. We'd been taught that deserts were bleak and dry, but he helped us to take our blinders off, pointing out that some rocks have the great capacity to store water for a long time between infrequent rains. The water is always there below the surface, even though the untrained eye would never recognize it. He took us to another group of rocks and pointed out that in a crevice there were plants growing in there, tiny plants equipped to take advantage of the water deep below. In a place that we thought was lifeless, there was life. We wouldn't have imagined that it was possible, and we wouldn't have been able to recognize it without an expert guide to point it out for us. I wonder what blinders the Israelites carried with them during their wilderness wanderings with Moses. In that lesson that we heard a few minutes ago that Anne shared with us from the book of Exodus, we heard about the Israelites being thirsty and complaining about being brought out into the desert. They complain about Moses and then, by extension, about God, the God who had rescued them from Egypt only to lead them into this desolate wasteland. So God leads Moses to a place where Moses can strike his staff against a rock, bringing forth water for the people to enjoy. What was the miracle that day? That Moses produced water where there hadn't been water before, or that Moses had simply released the water that the rocks had already been holding on to? Whatever happened, the blinders fell from the eyes of the Israelites, and the people realized that the wilderness perhaps was more hospitable than they had believed. The people recognized once again that the God who had led them into the wilderness will care for them and provide for them on their journey to the promised land. I wonder what blinders the disciples of Jesus carried with them as they traveled into Samaria. The Samaritans and the Jews of Jesus' time were not friends. Even though they had a shared heritage, they had grown apart and avoided one another as much as possible. And a Samaritan who was also a woman would especially be avoided. So if one of the disciples with Jesus had gone to the well and seen that Samaritan woman, he probably would have kept his distance from her. But Jesus encounters her and sees in her someone of value. He sees something that his disciples didn't see. She's of value and she's worth engaging in conversation. And so Jesus initiates a conversation with her, and they engage in a nuanced and layered discussion. And by the end of their encounter, he has shared divine grace with her, leading her to acknowledge him as the Messiah, inspiring her to go and tell others what she has learned. Jesus, in effect, has gone into the desert and produced water that the disciples wouldn't have thought possible or been able to recognize. What blinders do you carry with you? Do you ever find yourself in a dry place and believe that nothing good is there? A hopeless situation, a setting where there seems no way out, a scenario that seems lifeless? Do you ever see someone else or a group of people and find yourself ready to dismiss or ignore or look the other way because there can't be any good in them? What you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. Perhaps God might be calling you to remember the filters and blinders that you carry with you and change, to drop the blinders and to see things differently, to recognize the potential that lies below the surface, to acknowledge the valuable where others would decree there is no value. Now, if you want to know what finally happened to Uncle Andrew, read to the very end of The Magician's Nephew, or better yet, find a child and read it to them, or read it with them. And as you spend time with the godly innocence of the young, or the young at heart, you might become inspired to let go of the blinders that you've acquired through age and experience, finally able to see with holy eyes the world that God has created with all its diversity and potential. Amen.